Welcome to another episode of Growth Hacker TV. I'm Bronson Taylor, and today I have Ari Meisel with us. Ari, thanks for coming on the program.
Hey Bronson, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Now, Ari, you are the man behind LessDoing.com. So tell us, what is LessDoing.com? But more importantly, what's the ethos behind it? What's it all about?
So LessDoing.com is a system of productivity, but what people usually find surprising is that the motivation for creating it came out of my having a chronic illness. So 7 years ago, I was working in construction and real estate development and working really hard. It was a rough project, and I was stretching myself out pretty thin. And I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease. So Crohn's is a chronic inflammatory condition of the digestive tract. It's extremely painful. It's very difficult to stay, to maintain weight. You end up taking a lot of medicine. I was taking about 16 pills a day, and it's considered to be incurable. So basically, after some pretty horrible experiences and some really rough nights in the hospital, I decided that I needed to try to do something for myself. So I went on this long journey of self-tracking and self-experimentation. And about 4 months after that, I was off my medicine completely. And 3 or 4 months after that, I competed in my first triathlon.
Wow, it's quite a turnaround.
Thanks. So then I ended up doing that TEDx talk and set my sights on Ironman France. And in 2011, I competed in and completed Ironman France, which was incredible. Where I had been was really just so weak that going up a flight of stairs was rough for me.
Yeah.
So I felt like I had figured out about 80% of the problem. You know, I'd figured out the nutrition, I'd figured out the supplements, and I'd figured out the fitness aspects, but there was still a large component of my illness and my life that was related to stress. As many autoimmune diseases are, and many people's issues in general, stress is a really major psychological and physical factor. So I tried to figure out what could I do to systematically reduce stress in my life and other people's lives. And the best thing I could come up with was saving them as much time as possible, with the goal of being able to reclaim their mind and do with it the things that they want to do. Because I just kept hearing from so many people, and I know I was saying it myself, that I was overwhelmed. So Less Doing was born out of the idea of trying to free up as much time as possible. That's all I care about, so that I can help you reclaim your own mind and do with it the things that you want to do.
Yeah, no, that sounds incredible. And so let me ask you this. We're going to get into entrepreneurship in a second, but kind of in broad brushstrokes, how do people do less? Because it really applies to any kind of person, right? Your productivity system is not just for business people. So how do they do less in general? Because it almost seems impossible. It seems like a fairy tale, right?
Well, so it does apply to everybody. It applies not only to business problems, but personal issues as well as physical, ailments. It really helps with that. So basically, I have this 3-step process that I go through when I look at any problem, any task, any issue. And that is to optimize, automate, and then outsource. And it's a very important framework to follow that I followed in that order. So anybody can outsource something to a virtual assistant or whatever they want, but outsourcing an inefficient task does not make the process more efficient. So first, what we have to do is look at optimizing. So we look at what the problem is, break it down to its bare bones, gather some data, really figure out what you're dealing with. And then at that stage, you can try to lean it out as much as possible, trim the fat, get it down to its most bite-sized chunks. At that point, we look at automations. So whether that's software or some sort of process in place or people, but an automation that just happens, that deals with that issue and mitigates it. If there's anything left over at that point, that's when we look at outsourcing it to specialists or generalists. And I found that 3-part process has worked really well for attacking a variety of problems, from business processes to managing a household to dealing with kids and relationship issues and even health issues.
Yeah, it's so interesting as you talk about that 3-step process. because I think back to some of the guests we've had that have been incredibly successful at growing software products, and their process in the domain of software products looks a lot like that. They may use different words to describe it, but that's essentially the outcome that they're going after. But you've taken it and allowed yourself to apply it to anything and everything, which I think is really cool. Now let's talk about how it applies to entrepreneurship specifically, because I think there's a misconception that the busiest entrepreneurs are the ones that have the fastest growing companies. There's almost this, if you're hustling, if you're tired, if you're giving it all you got, then success must happen, right?
If you're head down.
If you're head down, absolutely.
I hate that expression so much. I can't even tell you. I always tell when I do coaching and I do mentoring with entrepreneurs, and I always say that like you have to be a complete person. If you're just got your head buried in a computer screen, unless of course you're writing code, but even so, there's a limit to how much you can bring to that situation. You need outside stimuli. You need to refresh your mind and your soul, doing other things, and then you can bring that back into your work. It's really hard, actually, getting entrepreneurs to do less while accomplishing more, because they feel like they have to be doing everything all the time, and that entrepreneurs are sort of that extreme example that everybody has, where we all feel like there's things that can happen in our lives that we're the only ones that can do it. And I'm sorry to say to everybody, but we're just not that unique. 95% of the things that you do on a daily basis can be done by other people or other things. It's that 5% that only you can do, that you're the best at, and that you should be able to focus on more than anything else. So there's a couple, it kind of swings both ways with entrepreneurs. You have entrepreneurs who try to do everything themselves and run, super lean, end up like killing themselves after a couple of weeks. And then you have the other ones who go the extreme opposite, and they feel like they need a team of 20 right away to, do their Kickstarter campaign. And that doesn't work out there. So honestly, like it's really a matter of perspective. It requires going outside yourself for a second and looking back in at the process and being like, oh, well, there's a way to make this more efficient because that step doesn't make sense there, and this is redundant, and somebody else can do this. Oh, and there's an app that does this for you now, and all that kind of thing. So
yeah. How do you make the decision on what the 5% to put on your plate is, as opposed to what the pieces are that you're going to optimize and automate and outsource? How do you make that distinction? Because obviously the people that need 20 people on Kickstarter didn't make that distinction appropriately, and the people that run super lean and kill themselves also didn't make that distinction appropriately. So how do you make it?
So it actually runs the other way, believe it or not. So a lot of people don't know what that 5% is that they can only do. So for instance, I would have never seen myself as a writer, and I still don't think I'm a good writer, but I know that I can express my ideas well enough. So when I write my blog, I'm doing the content, but everything else, posting it, getting the images together, scheduling the posts, all that stuff is done by other systems, other people. It's not so much about discovering the 5%. It's about getting rid of the other 95% so that you can have a clear mind to know what it is that's left, that you're the one that can only do it. And honestly, I'm of the mindset that you can always be optimizing more. There's always a way to make it more efficient. And again, keep in mind that my goal is to give you back your mind so you can do what you want to do with it. And it's amazing. I have ideas every day, and that there was years of my life where I wasn't getting any ideas at all because I was just so bogged down in the minutia.
No, that's great. Let me ask you this. You said earlier that it's about doing less but accomplishing more. Do you actually think that you can do both? That it's not about doing less and getting less done, but that when you actually automate these processes and take on the 5% that's left when it's all said and done, that more in total actually gets done?
Oh, I mean, 100%. That's the whole point. I don't want people to achieve less. I want them to achieve more and produce more. But I want the doing to take less of their time. It's less doing, more living, honestly. And part of that is the idea of making sort of a chain reaction of things happening, so you can do one thing and then 10 things happen because of it. So you're really multiplying efforts while you're doing less.
Yeah. And now you consult with a lot of entrepreneurs and you walk them through this, sometimes through educational products, sometimes, one-on-one in different settings. And I'm sure you get some entrepreneurs that just have a super hard time with this because our habits are ingrained. We like head down. It makes us feel safe. Even if we're accomplishing less, it's still a safe place for us because we're so used to it. What do you say to them to break through them? Because I know there's some people watching this and they think, okay, yeah, that's fine for someone like you, Ari, but for me, this is how things work. I'm sure you have go-to things you say just to break through people's just hard heads.
So, first of all, it's important to realize that I have had a website design company. I've had a online services company. I have had a home theater installation and low voltage installation company, and I've been a real estate developer. I've invented building materials. I've worked for MAC Cosmetics. I basically have done, and I'm an EMT. I'm a pilot. Like, I've kind of done a lot of different things.
Good answer.
Yeah, and that's not tooting my own horn. It's just saying I've experienced these things. And another thing that's important is when I worked in construction. The deal, my first project that I built, the deal was that anybody that worked on the job had to teach me their trade. So I spent 3 years plumbing, removing asbestos, digging ditches, welding, breaking bones, all that stuff. So I've gone up and down through like every vertical possible and have seen the different inefficiencies and the ways to do this. The problem is that when we get so busy, we don't see it. So it's not so much that I have to convince someone to try this stuff. It's really that I have to kind of give them a smack and get them out of themselves for just a minute and be like, look, there is another way to do this. If you don't want to do it, fine. But I'm going to show you how you can do it really easily.
Yeah. How do you get them out of themselves? Is it just through a conversation like this? Or is it through, hey, for one day, you have to go and be alone and just stop? I mean, is it kind of like experiencing something that helps them? Is it learning something that helps them? Is it both?
It's usually one conversation is what it takes, because I can say to someone, well, there's a couple ways it works, but I can say to somebody, tell me a process that you go through on a daily basis. And usually people can answer that right away, but I love when someone's like, I don't know what I'm not sure. I'm like, really? There's not something you do every single day? Because my criteria for starting to look at automating and outsourcing something is if I do it twice.
That's a pretty low barrier, yeah.
Well, and regardless of whether I may never do it again, but it's a skill set that I'm developing in terms of how to better and effectively outsource and automate things. So I say, tell me a pain point. Tell me what you're spending the most time on. Tell me your biggest challenge. And then I usually have a pretty easy way to show them that you can do this other way. And it's like, then it's as far down the rabbit hole as they want to go.
Gotcha. So the ideology can be applied. It's simple to understand, hard to execute maybe, but simple to understand.
Another important one with entrepreneurs to point out also, and business owners, is that sometimes I'll attack it from a completely different side of it, which is their health. And I'll say, okay, look, you want to do this way, that's fine. But I'm not going to touch your business processes. I'm not going to tell you to spend less than 20 hours a day coding. What I will show you is how you can use the 4 hours of sleep that you have to get the maximum benefits from it. How you can meditate in 5 minutes and reduce your stress levels and increase cognitive performance and eat, all these things to support that lifestyle that you want to have.
Gotcha.
One of the distinctions that I try to make, because people always ask me how I compare to Tim Ferriss, and I've met Tim at several different events, and I think what Tim does is amazing and really inspiring. But what's very different is that I don't want to inspire people necessarily to quit their jobs, create a passive income business, and travel the world for 15 months. I have a family. I have 3 kids. I just want to make everything in my life easier. So I want to make everything in everyone else's life easier too.
Yeah, as a father myself, your story rings a little more at home to me than the Tim Ferriss story, even though I'm also inspired by a lot of what he says. You're absolutely right. Life is very busy when you have a family, and people don't realize that a lot of entrepreneurship is not done by 20-somethings, but 30-somethings. And they're people that just have responsibilities that don't go away ever, and so they need to be more efficient and automate things. Now, this program is all about growing a user base, retaining users for your product. That's really what we talk about most of the time on here. Do you think that this mindset can be applied to growing a user base? Because you have your own products, you have your own website, you have your own membership sites. Do you automate the growth of those things? And if so, how?
Yeah, so it's kind of a big subject, honestly, but yes, I do. So social media, for one thing, is something that I'm like a complete idiot at, but I have completely automated it. At one point, I hired a social media consultant, and she was really awesome. One of the many outsourcing things that I've done that I've been really happy with. and she was great. And I watched sort of what she did, and I learned a lot of things from her. And I think she got me from, like a couple hundred Twitter followers to 2,000 or something like that. And then I figured out how to completely automate what she was doing for me, to the most part. And the way that I looked at it was, again, that 95%. So maybe I could automate 95% of it. Maybe that 5% that I was paying her to do was definitely worth it. But I was happy with the 95% level. Maybe I'd get, a few less followers a week, but it would still work. So I completely automated that strategy, and I have 9,000 followers on Twitter or something now, without me writing anything on Twitter, and without me really knowing what to do. And I'm a big proponent of, if you can automate something and not have to deal with it and not worry about it, then why not do it? So I wouldn't be able to justify me spending time on social media, but because I've automated it and it all happened easily and for free, I've gotten clients, I've gotten opportunities for speaking, I've gotten some interesting things because of Twitter. So it all comes back. As far as growing the user base on the website, most of the posts that are done on my blog are done by virtual assistants. I curate the content, but the actual posting, the timing, the design, everything is done with my direction in the beginning, but it's done by virtual assistants, so I don't spend the time on that. So I'm able to produce an enormous amount of content for just one person. And then even my newsletter, I every week on my newsletter, I put out on Wednesdays, I put 2 studies, one on wellness and one on productivity. And the research is done by the virtual assistants. I make my commentary, and then that's what goes out based on. So I have very little touch on a lot of this stuff, and it's just kind of building on the side.
Yeah. So tell me if I'm wrong here. So it seems like some of the lower level things, like a blog post, a newsletter, getting Twitter followers, that you're outsourcing a lot of that kind of stuff. But then the really high touch stuff, the Udemy courses, the consulting, the one-on-one coaching, you jump in hands on and tackle those 100%, because that's where you're actually making your money and where you're providing the real value. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's definitely fair, and it is. And it's true. That's where I'm making more of the money, but it's also where I'm learning the most. When I get to coach with somebody, which I'm pretty selective about the coaching work that I do now, I learn a lot from the people I work with, and I learn what the problems are and what people are dealing with. And it's really fascinating. The Udemy course is an interesting one. So I was teaching through Skillshare originally in New York, and the class was really popular. It was doing great. And I loved it. I really loved teaching, and I never would have saw myself as a teacher. But of course, it required 2.5 hours or 3 hours of my time each time I did it. And the numbers were good, but it was still 3 hours at the end of the night, when you've got young kids, is like, it's not an ideal thing. And there's also a scalability issue there. So that's when I kind of turned over to Udemy and created the course. And now the course marketing is automated for the most part. Creating new content is all I have to do. And that's what I love doing, is sort of getting these ideas out there. So the Udemy stuff is a really kind of amazing passive income stream in some ways.
Yeah.
And it has led to some coaching clients from that. But other than that, yes. So I do the one-on-one coaching. I also do a lot of corporate seminars for people to help make their teams more efficient. And that's the stuff that I really enjoy and really get to see the impact.
Now, you said that Udemy is kind of automated at this point. Do you just mean through the channels you've already talked about? They're finding out about you through the newsletter, the blog, Twitter, or is it automated in some other sense? Because we've had both the founders one of the founders of Udemy on and their growth engineer on. I have classes on Udemy. So Udemy's come up a few times on this program. And so if you have any secrets about automating sales there, we'd love to hear them.
So first of all, I have to say that I am so pleased with working with Udemy. I think that they've created such a great platform, and they really take care of their professors or their teachers. They do an enormous amount of marketing on your behalf. They do all these discount stuff, and they have an affiliate program. I think they've really done it right. So on one hand, I would say that they're almost automating it for you. Once you get to a certain critical mass, which I think for them they say is 100 students, and then you can start to sort of take off. It's true, it really does build on itself. But I do a lot of stuff with discount codes and with my podcast, giving out discount codes and offering prizes that way. And then I build it into my newsletter. And so there are other automations as well. It does seem that the key with Udemy is how you work the discount codes.
Yeah, that's actually what their own growth engineer said. He said he sends out an email with a time limit and a discount, and those two things together are almost magical. And you can tell whenever they send out one of those emails, because you're probably seeing it too, your sales go up every time they send out one of those things. So they definitely work.
Well, the brilliant thing about it, I mean, not brilliant, it's so basic, but you can sign up for a Udemy course and then take it a year from now. But as long as you get in now, you're locked in, which is really the appeal, I think.
Yeah, it really reverses the risk. One of the old school selling tactics, don't put the risk on me, you take it, and that way I can have the course anytime. Now, you also have a monthly subscription to your blog where they get premium content. I think it's $10 a month. I think it's also maybe a couple $100 a year or something like that. Or actually, what is it a year?
It's just $10 a month, so $10 it's $100 for the, or $99 for the year.
Yeah, there it is, $99 for the year. What have you found about getting people to convert to the premium membership? Because there's a lot of people watching that are in that situation. They have a free offering, and then they have a premium offering. I mean, that's what Growth Hacker TV is. There's a free and a premium offering. Anything there you've learned as you grow the user base?
So that's been a really interesting experiment for me. Basically, the idea for that was that I really wanted to do some. I was starting to get more into podcasting, and then I decided I really wanted to do some video content. And I found I use Screencast Maker on the Mac now, which I think is just a really easy and good program for making screencasts. So it was easy and fun to do it. So there was content that I wanted to share, and it wasn't stuff that I wanted to necessarily share with the general public. Not because it's private per se, but there's one where I go through my actual inbox sight unseen, and I go through and I show how I process my email. And it's not like there's going to be something really super private in there necessarily, but it's also the kind of thing that I just don't want everybody to be able to see. So it was more about putting a little bit of a barrier there and just to see what happened. And it's done really well. People have signed up, and I haven't pushed that specifically. All that happens is that every couple weeks I put up a pro post, and if someone goes to it, it's going to pop up with that curtain wall and say, or the paywall, and say you have to sign up if you want to see this.
Yeah, no, that's cool. Well, this has been a great interview. Couple last questions here. One, I look at all that you've done, just even recently with all the products, with all the informational things you put out. Walk me through kind of the timeline, because people, when they look at an empire, it's hard to see how it was built. When you look at Rome, you can't imagine the first brick, right? So what was kind of the anchor? What was the first step? I mean, obviously it started with you and your passion, but in terms of actually putting something out in the world, was it the Udemy course first? Was it put up a blog first? Was it a one-on-one consulting gig that kind of got your head around this stuff and figured out your teaching style? Walk me through the timeline a little bit.
Sure. So it's really easy. So I started the blog, and shortly thereafter I thought, hey, I could write a book. And of course, but I was like, well, I really need to see how people are responding to this. So it just so happened that Skillshare was sort of starting up at that point. So I thought, I'll teach a Skillshare class just so that I can see what people like and what they don't, so that I can write my book. So the first course had 10 people, and I think it was $15 or something. And I just went through a bunch of websites that I thought were really cool, and people loved it. And it was really good. And it enabled me to then create a couple more fundamentals and started teaching the class more, and the class started getting more popular. And eventually I had 40 people at every class, and the book idea sort of went out of my head, because I was like, you know what, I really need to develop this more and more. So it was through that interaction that I was able to really hone the content and bring that back to the blog. And then that ended up transferring over to become a Udemy course. And now I do have a book deal from Penguin for my book to come out next spring.
Nice. Yeah, so that's kind of cool. So from blog to unscalable teaching with Skillshare to scalable teaching with Udemy, and then you end up with a book, but the book's almost an afterthought, because what you were doing was probably just as exciting now.
Right, and the coaching sort of came up in the middle of the Skillshare classes. I taught the classes, I guess, for almost a year and a half. So somewhere in the middle, someone came up to me after and said, hey, do you do any coaching? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. And this is how much it costs. And I totally made it up on the spot. And they said, great. So I started doing that. And then then every class after that, I was like, and by the way, I do, coaching. And then one of my clients asked if I could come do the course for his company. And that's when I started doing corporate stuff.
Isn't it true that so much of progress in business really is oblique? I just read a book called Obliquity, I think. But that there's not usually a straight route. I'm going from A to B. You think you are. You think you're going from A and B is writing a book. But then you go all over the place and you end up maybe there, maybe not. But has that been your experience that it's just really hard to know what's right around the corner, but that it's still good?
Absolutely. And one of the things that I always tell people is, obviously there's versions of companies where it's really just all about the hustle, whether or not, actually, I don't know if you know it, but like Nick Loper has this podcast called The Side Hustle, which I love. And it's all about people who have like their side business that they turn into something. Mm-hmm. And a lot of them are, it's like having niche websites or having online content or something. And those are all great. But generally speaking, the general advice that I tell people is if you want to succeed, you just have to know your stuff better than anybody else, mm-hmm. And that should come through in some way as long as you can get rid of all the other obfuscating noise. Mm-hmm. So getting rid of that 95% so you can focus on what you know, making what you know better than what everybody else knows, and then sharing that in some way.
Yeah, so it's not so much focusing on should I start a blog, should I teach a class, it's know your stuff, and it doesn't really matter what the outlet is. It's going to make money. You're going to have fun doing it. You're going to be seen as a thought leader. It's going to snowball into something else. It's not about the medium as much as the message, right?
I couldn't have said it better. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, this has been an eye-opening interview for me. It's really exciting just to think about these things. I love simplicity, automation. I love doing less as a way of life. And I got a lot further I can go on that journey still. Let me ask you one last question here, kind of a high-level question. You can take it anywhere you want. What's the best advice that you have for any startup that's trying to grow? They're watching this. They're trying to grow. What do you say to them?
To a startup or to the founder?
Well, to the founder. Let's make it personal.
Okay, so I would tell them that whatever you're doing, you need to find something, whether it's a class or some sort of offering or some sort of educational thing that you can go and learn that you believe has absolutely nothing to do with your business whatsoever.
Now, why is that the advice?
So it's a big part in getting yourself out of yourself. So that's part of it. You need to do something that your brain is not used to doing. Mm-hmm. In my case, less doing happened while I was taking a welding class.
Just the idea for it.
I took a sculptural welding class in Brooklyn, and where we learned how to weld. And it was like an 8-week class, and it was one of the most fun things I've ever done. Mm-hmm. I hadn't worked with my hands in a while since I'd done the construction project, that first one, and it was completely different from what I was doing on a day-to-day basis. And in that moment, you sort of lose yourself and you start to think about other things, and your mind starts to wander, and then you start to get ideas. Mm-hmm. And those ideas are what lead to true success, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. Just about a week and a half or 2 weeks ago, I went stand-up paddleboarding on a Saturday morning because I'd never done it and I always wanted to. And when I was out there, when I got done, I realized my mind is clear. And it's the first time it's been clear in a long time. And I didn't force myself to make it clear. The activity made it clear because I didn't know how to force myself to stop thinking. But out there, I stopped thinking about all the noise and life was simple again. And I want to start doing things like that. I think what you just said is amazing advice because I recently experienced it. And so I know that there's really something to that.
They actually say that, and I think they've proven this, but if you want to increase your IQ, there's 2 very simple things you can do. And one of them is brush your teeth with your non-dominant hand and take a shower with your eyes closed. Uh-huh. Because it's weird, and your brain has to sort of figure out what's going on.
Yeah, it's like picking a new path on your drive home. Just do something that makes you think again. Because being on autopilot in the wrong sense, not in the way we've been talking about, you don't want your mind just to stop working. It's a muscle, and you got to exercise it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, Ari, this has been a great interview. Thank you so much for coming on Growth Hacker TV.
Thanks for having me.